Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thorough Newspaper Analysis, which is brought to you by LawSeco. So, these are the topics that we will be discussing today. Firstly, reject this inequitable climate proposal. Now, as we know that the United Nations Secretary General has asked India to put down its coal consumption in order to provide a healthy and carbon-free environment over there. So, why India should not be taking up this call and should reject this proposal, and what consequences does it have, we'll be discussing in this article. Secondly, a push for reform. So it is again related or something coming from the United Nations again. This basically talks about the composition of the United Nations Security Council and how a kind of hegemony is being created with the current composition, and why a reform in that is required. We will be seeing in this article. Thirdly, for the welfare of animals. So this is a very beautifully written article, which is again from the Hindu, and it talks about the act that we have in India, which is the Prevention of Cruelty Towards Animal, or the Cruelty to Animals Act, which is called as the PCA Act, and why an overhauling, or to say, a review of this act is really important if you really want to do the welfare of the animals. And fourthly, out and equal. It talks about the homosexuality, and like that we have, we do not have it as a criminalized offense anymore now, but then again it would be brought to a practical essence and aspect only if we allow the same-sex marriages as well. Otherwise it will be of no point. And then lastly, we have the news in flash. Before that, let's have a look at the LawSeco courses that we have for you. So we have the Lord of the Courses, which is the Judiciary Test Prep course. The link to this amazing course is there in the comment section, in the description box below. You can have a look at it. And you can also download for yourself free study material if you are also preparing for judicial services. Then we have various other courses also. They can be viewed at the LawSeco page. Let's see that what is the multiple choice question for the day. Which among the following is not a G4 country, or which of the following is not a member of the G4 group? Firstly, Japan. Second, South Africa. Third, Brazil. Or fourth, Germany. So if you know the answer to this question, do jot it down in the comment section below. So this is the descriptive question for the day. Does the composition and rights in the United Security Council represent 21st century world dynamics? Critically examine. So here you have to understand that whether the composition or the functioning or the method of functioning that the United Nations Security Council follows, does it really accommodate the requirements of the 21st century world or not? And always remember that whenever the question has this term written, critically examine, you have to write the merits as well as the demerits. So you just don't have to criticize a particular thing or just favor it completely. You have to write both the pros as well as the cons of the given statement. So that is the basic idea of having critically examine, or critically discuss, or critically evaluate, analyze. So wherever this word critically is there, you need to write both the sides of the argument. With this, let's quickly start with a discussion for the first article for the day, which talks about the United Nations Secretary General's proposal to India. Now, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, while delivering at the Darbari Seth Memorial Lecture recently, made a call for India. As in, by this call, we mean that he actually gave a proposal to India, and he actually, in a way, tried to give a kind of dictation as to what India should be doing, specifically in regard with the carbon emission. So in the call, or to say in the proposal, the United Nations Secretary General said that India should give up coal immediately and make no new investments in coal after 2020. So as we're already running in 2020, and the Secretary General already saying that India should give up coal, use of coal, manufacturing or refining of coal, or any activities that are dependent upon coal, we should leave them immediately, and we should make no new investments in the coal after 2020. Now, this needs to be understood here is that if we talk about the Indian economy and the setup that we follow in the Indian economy, it is very important for us that we have coal as one of the biggest energy drivers in India. So if it firstly, abandoning it completely is a very far sought dream, because currently we are still a developing country and we need coal for that matter to run our industries. Next is that when it talks about leaving or quitting or giving up the coal immediately and making no new investments after 2020, this would be something like that. Maybe this is something of my own analysis, but in history we all must have heard of the emperor who was known as Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So basically, all his policies were never bad. He had a very good policy system, but the only problem that the only problem with his policies or the execution of his policies was that just before they could reap the most of the benefit, he used to withdraw those policies. So in a way, he used to make huge investments, used to do a lot of setup for everything, but he did not have the patience to complete those policies. Maybe if India tries to give up coal immediately and make no new investments after 2020, it would be one of those similar steps wherein we have invested so much and our economy is so highly dependent upon coal and coal driven industries. And if we try to give up coal immediately, it would be something really futile and bring a lot of harsh consequences to our already deteriorating economy. So Antonio Guterres at a press conference recently asked India and China to reduce emissions by 45% by 2030, so and to come on par with the developed countries. Now here is the biggest irony, and something that we really need to ponder upon is that uh, only a few days, or actually it's been months now, a very amazing article had come up in Hindu. You can also search it if you're able to. It was related to having carbon tax. So carbon tax is something which is not prevalent anywhere. It is just a hypothetical situation, and it is a probability that we might get. So in that article, it was told that if we try to think to give the responsibility of reducing the carbon emission equally to all the nations, it would not at all be justified. Because see, what has happened is that we all of us know that the industrial revolution, it happened in the mid of the 19th century, that was after 1840 to 1845. So it occurred in the primarily in the Western countries and specifically the US. So obviously these were the countries that had more access to industrialization, and that is why these were the first ones firstly, and also the huge or the largest users or consumers of carbon and other or coal or other such fossil fuels. So using them, they have come to become as the developed nations, and now when they have developed themselves and their own industries, and now they are at a very good economic stature, they now actually try to put up the responsibility of reducing the carbon emission on the countries that are still on the verge of development, just like India and various other African countries and other Southeast Asian countries also, they are still developing countries. And now if you would like to burden them on reducing the carbon emissions, keeping in mind that you have already yourself consumed a lot of carbon and emitted a lot of carbon and consumed a lot of fossil fuels, this is something just not equitable. So the idea in that article had been given that we should provide the countries with carbon tax. So carbon tax would be simply the tax that the countries would be paying for the global cause of carbon reduction or the emission of carbon reduction, as per the consumption of fossil fuels that they have made. So if a particular country has consumed X amount of fossil fuels and it has gained this much, so the carbon tax would also be accordingly. And if the countries, those who use less of carbon because they're still on the verge of development, they do not have those industries to use a lot of fossil fuels, they should be paying lesser of taxes. So that was a very good idea that can be implemented. But here, if in this scenario, if you would like to project and give India equal responsibility as to those nations who have already developed their own industries and everything, this was not at all be justified. And now here is again a reiteration as to why India should reject the call, is that it's a call to deindustrialize the country and abandon the population into a permanent low development trap. So basically, India is still on a verge of industrialization, and yes, it should not be undermined that we should definitely take up greener and renewable ways to run our industries, and India is also doing that. As we know that very recently, a huge solar power plant has been set up in Rewa, Madhya Pradesh, and similar high capacity solar power plants and other wind power plants are being set up in the entire country. But still, an immediate switch to renewable energy will neither be a practical step to take in terms of our economy as well, and not even in the terms of our capacity as well. Then secondly, sets aside the principles of United Nations framework for climate change, Framework Convention on Climate Change, according to which Article 3.1 says that we should have a common responsibility, but then again it should be differentiated one, as in that all the nations should have a common responsibility to, to bring down the carbon emissions and to control global warming, but this responsibility should be differentiated on the basis of the capacity of that nation, and you cannot really give equal responsibility to every nation disregarding the economic or the other situations prevailing in that country. Then India has the lowest per capita income among the G20 members and is worst hit by COVID-19. Please mind it is COVID-19 amongst the G20 members. And then further, India has good track record in reducing emissions. Now, as we know that whenever any country becomes, and specifically we talk about for climate change, you become a member of any of the, protocols or international conventions like the Paris Convention, Kyoto Protocol, etc. So you also have something that you call as the national commitments. So once you promise to be a part of it, you are a part of it, definitely you should be working in the agenda or the goal of that convention. Right. So India has been one of those few countries that have actually delivered up to their national commitments, and India has been really faring well till date. So here a very good example is given that the total contribution of cumulative emissions, like the total emissions coming from Indian side is only 4%, and that too when we have a population of 1.3 billion. And on the contrary, if we talk about the entire European Union, they have a population only of 448 million, and still the contribution of the cumulative emission from their side is 20%, which is like 5 times of what India is emitting even after having such a huge population. So this should be kept in mind. Then the developed countries excluding Russia and East Europe have reduced their emissions by only 1.3% between 1990 to 2017 according to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change report. So then India lacks its own alternatives of coal, and for it be obviously that we cannot just directly switch to oil and natural gas for all our energy needs, and we need to have coal for at least some time unless we become stable. But yes, again, efforts should be made regularly and in parallel to reduce other kinds of emissions. So yes, this was all for this article. You can go through the slides once again to clarify your point, and I hope that the entire gist of this article has been made clear to you. Now let's discuss the next article for the day, which talks about UN reforms. So as the United Nations commences the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly, the incoming president of the United Nations General Assembly, please keep in mind that Volkan Bozkir is not the current or the running president of United Nations General Assembly. Actually, he is the incoming president of the General Assembly. So he has voiced a concern that the structure of the 15-member United Nations Security Council ought to be more democratic and representative. This is something that many of the nations have also been talking about, and even as we know that in June itself, India has been once again chosen to be the non-permanent member of the Security Council of United Nations. So one of the basic agenda that India entered the Security Council with was also to bring a multinational or a multilateral world order. So on the similar lines, Volkan Bozkir, who is the incoming president of the General Assembly, has also said that the current functioning of the Security Council, as we know that there are a few principal organs of the United Nations. So one of those is the Security Council as well. So in Security Council, we have a total of 15 members. Now, as in countries or nations are these 15 members, amongst whom 10 are the non-permanent members, whereas 5 are the permanent members. Now, as we know that India has been chosen to become a non-permanent member, whereas the other 5 permanent members, that are the US, UK, France, Russia, and China. So these are the 5 permanent members, and the non-permanent members, they keep changing after a fixed period of time. So now India has been chosen as the non-permanent members, but these 5 permanent members actually, they enjoy a huge power when we talk about the world order. And unfortunately, what has been happening, and why actually are we looking forward to a multilateral or a multinational setup even in the Security Council, is that many a times, due to the enormous powers that these 5 permanent members enjoy being in the Security Council, most of the world trends or the decisions that are taken globally are much, they are a lot lenient towards these five nations, and also they are mostly driven by the whims and fancies of these five nations, due to which a multilateral or multinational approach is just shattered down, and the nations that actually require the attention of various things, and even that the nations that should have been favored more, keeping in mind their situation, that does not really happen on the real ground. Now let's see that what are the other reasons also that this reform is needed. The reform is a long overdue, especially from the G4 countries for a permanent seat. So basically we have these G4 nations: Brazil, Germany, India and Japan. And these four nations that actually have been always supporting each other for a permanent membership in the United Nations Security Council. So all these four nations, they support each other that we also deserve to become the permanent members of the Security Council. Then, as we just discussed, that the Security Council's 5 permanent members enjoy anachronism. So basically, this says, just as we discussed, that the policies, the decisions are mostly taken in favor of them. Either they're in favor of them, or they are taken just keeping in mind the whims and fancies of these five nations alone. Then push for reform gathered momentum after US and UK's unilateral declaration of war against Iraq in 2003. So then, you see that US and UK both are the permanent members of Security Council, and there was no check to them. So they could just, behave in a manner they themselves wanted to. Then the reform process through intergovernmental negotiations framework was opposed by US, Russia and China. So because now then again, they are very strong members over there. So they opposed it again. So UN remains reflective of the geopolitical scenario, because again, United Nations is, as the name itself is talking about, United Nations as a union of all the nations of this world. And that is why it should be taking in mind in the needs of the entire geopolitical situation, and not just should cater to needs of only a few nations. Then it is also facing challenges because collective response to the humanity's biggest problems are not being focused in here, and post-order is facing existential threat to its stability. So this is something that we should be taking care of very significantly. Now, the next article for the day talks about welfare of animals. Now, here recently, PETA, or PETA, as you would like to call it, basically it stands for People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. So it is an organization wherein people, they come together voluntarily to work for the cause of welfare of animals. They have moved to the Delhi High Court seeking enactment of proper regulations for animal husbandry procedure. So basically, in India, it is not like we do not have a proper legislation or a legal framework for protecting the animals against any kind of violence or abuse. But then again, almost a similar problem that the entire criminal justice system in India also was facing, which hopefully will be cured now by the special committee that has been set up to overhaul the criminal laws in India. Similarly, the animal rules or the animal protection rules also in India, they were like created way back in 1960s, and they have never been really upgraded, keeping in mind the requirements of today's society. And that is why, in the similar direction, PETA has asked or moved to Delhi High Court to enact proper regulations for animal husbandry procedure. Now, as we know, what animal husbandry means is that when you have you tame animals specifically for some commercial benefits, like for example a poultry farm, it is also animal husbandry. Then we have the dairies, also is a form of animal husbandry, etc. So over the past 1 year, there have been reports of animals being subjected to sexual abuse, acid attacks, and they're being thrown off the rooftops and burnt alive. So this is something, when at one place we call ourselves and our own country to be a land of ahimsa and to be a land of peace and love, this something falls very contrary to what we actually preach. So if, animals, you're treating your animals so badly, you are just, there have been severe, you must have heard that in various these shelters that are specifically for cows. Recently in UP also, there was a case that came up wherein the caretakers of those shelters only were involved into sexually abusing those cows. So this is really bizarre to be a part of, a civilian society. And further, various cases of acid attacks on cows as well as dogs have also come forward, and they are being ill-treated very badly and even burnt alive. And this is something, there is a very famous proverb which says that if you want to know the prosperity, or if you want to know about the humanity that a nation follows, just look at the condition of the animals in that area. So if the animals of that of a particular nation are treated well, you can understand as to what value they would be giving to human lives as well. But in India, on the contrary, it is really bizarre to know that the animals are so they're ill treated so badly. So then why is the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, which is the basic legislation in India, PCA Act that we have, 1960, why does it need to be amended? Firstly, the severe offences are treated on a par with less severe ones. Now, this is something, if just imagine that even in the Indian Penal Code, an offence of, hurt, grievous hurt, culpable homicide, and murder, they were all treated at par and equally. Do you think that delivering justice would have been a really easier task, or it would have brought any practical sense to the justice system? Obviously not, because all these four offenses, they are different in nature. Now, for example, murder and private defense, these are two, the consequence in a way, or the result of both is causing death of somebody else. But then again, the intention, then the punishment, the way the court takes up these cases, it is entirely different. Similarly, it should be the case in the PCA Act as well, but unfortunately that does not happen. And severe offences, like for example, if you were badly killing an animal, or even just kick, just not as in, but in just keeping in comparison with killing an animal, if you are merely hurting or killing or hitting an animal, all are treated at par, due to which the severity of the offences cannot be brought up. Further, no more severe offence ones must be made cognizable as well as non-bailable. Now, most of the offences in it are actually non-cognizable. That means that the person causing any kind of harm, or even killing the animal, he cannot be arrested before a permission is taken from the magistrate, which is it actually makes or gives an excuse to the police as well to be inactive in such cases. Then the PCA recreates a plethora of exceptions. It's just like in the case of animal husbandry, which actually this case is looking forward to resolve. It says that dehorning, castration, nose roping, and branding. Like for example, you might have seen that in the cattle, maybe it cows or bulls, you might have seen that they cut their horns with hot iron knives or something like that. So it is really, really, they do not even go for anesthesia, providing anesthesia before doing this. Then they also go for castration and branding, wherein very hot plates are actually then completely punched against the body of the animal to put up an identity mark on that very animal, to so that the people know that this particular cattle belongs to this person. So that is called branding. Nose roping and is when you pierce the nose of that animal to just tie a rope so that you can easily navigate your animals. These are something which are very cruel in nature, and in no way they should be provided or should be protected under any kind of exceptions for animal husbandry. Because obviously now in the current scenario, you might be thinking as to, if we do not do this, like for example branding, then how do we come to know as to this animal belongs to which group or who owns this particular animal? Trust me, friends, there are a lot of technological advances that have been made. For example, you can microchip your animals. Like you must have seen that many times people get their dogs and pets also microchipped, where it's a very simple procedure. A chip is brought down under your skin, and even you can be tracked very easily. So this is something, it is not painful at all, and you don't have to inflict your animals to so much of cruelty. So you can do this as well. So the PCA suffers from ambiguity in definition, as it provides for prevent the infliction of unnecessary pain and suffering. Now, what do you really mean by unnecessary pain? This becomes so subjective, because for some person, even killing the other animal is necessary, and even he can. Now, what you think to be necessary or unnecessary is a very subjective matter. So this ambiguity should also be removed. With this, we move towards the same-sex marriage, and also from the previous article, it's a humble request from our side, from the side of Law Seco as well, that if you are, if you do not do something positive for the animals, it's totally fine. It's totally your call. But if you can't really do something positive, why do you even, who gives us the right to think that we have the right to harm the animals? If we can't do something good, we should not do anything bad as well. So this was a message, like I really would like to take this opportunity to just tell all of us, and or remind all of us that we are humans, and we are really capable of a lot of love and compassion. And what kind of humans are we would be determined seriously by the type, by the by the way we treat our animals. So please, it's a humble request from our side as well, that take this opportunity to be responsible citizens and show love and compassion towards all the animals, be it a dog, cat, cow, be it anyone. And with this, we move towards the last discussion for the day, which talks about the same-sex marriage. So, as we know that 2 years back, that the Supreme Court of India had actually decriminalized homosexuality in India, which was very fairly celebrated in the entire nation. But then again, we need to understand that was just making, decriminalizing the homosexuality is enough, or does it even give something or some rights to them as well or not? Just taking an example, even in the article it was mentioned that when we talk about the Domestic Violence Act, and as we know that in India now live-in relationships have become legal. So two consenting individuals who are adult, as in they can live in a live-in relationship without even getting into tied under the name of marriage. So this was very highly celebrated as well, and it was considered to be one of the very modern steps toward taken towards a modern society. But then again, just imagine if no rights were available to the partners who are living in together, would this entire movement or this advancement would have made any sense? Obviously not. But now it has been reiterated by the courts, and even in the Domestic Violence Act it has been mentioned that even a girl who lives in a relationship with a man and she's not even married to him can also sue the person for causing any kind of domestic violence on her. Now this is something that gives the teeth to any legislation and gives it the practical essence. Another very general example we can take of just right to equality. So Article 14 of the Indian Constitution provides us with this fundamental right to equality. Now, it is something really good to be celebrated about. But what is the right means to achieve that equality? What are the practical things that make it really achievable and, that can be actually brought into the real picture? Is the very essence of having reasonable classification. Now that is how only we are treating the people equally, and we are trying to bring those people who are currently not equal to the other ones. So these are the things that actually give teeth and make a proper complete legislation practical one. And on the contrary, talking about the same-sex or the homosexuality, though it was decriminalized in India, but same-sex marriages are still criminal. So this is something that, it is very ironical in nature that at one side you are trying to be modern and you call yourselves very modernized, that we have decriminalized the same-sex marriage, same-sex, homosexuality. But on the other side, you say that same-sex marriage, which actually is giving the practical essence to the very thing that you decriminalized a few years ago, same-sex marriage is, something against our culture, our values, our law, etc. So just against this contention, a PIL has been filed in the Delhi High Court seeking the registration of same-sex marriages under the Hindu Marriage Act 1955, and that it should be brought up that same-sex marriages are very much valid as the other kinds of marriages provided under the Hindu Marriage Act. But on the contrary, the Solicitor General of India has opposed it, and he has actually done it in the name of our law, legal system and values, which it's so subjective in nature, it's really difficult to understand. So these are the arguments in favor of this argument. So the Supreme Court has decriminalized homosexuality. So it was in the case of Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India in 2018. And then again, just we said that the women have been protected under Domestic Violence Act even in the cases of live-in partners. And then what is no longer criminal deserves the space and flower to shape its own destiny. Obviously, you think you have made something decriminalized. Now you don't think that this act is a criminal one. So why don't you give it the opportunity to flourish more in your society? So if you're not allowing it to flourish, it means that in the bottom of your heart or in the underneath your mind setup, you think that this is something not right and thus should not be given a chance to flourish well. And here the arguments against it are: the judgment merely decriminalizes homosexual life and nothing more or nothing less, which obviously makes a very less sense to at least me. Then in domestic violence cases, who will be treated as wife? So, if this is something really to be thought upon, because if, two lesbians or a girl who is in love with another girl, if she lives, they're living together in a live-in relationship, who would be treating you as wife? As the one who has been protected under the live-in partner or the Domestic Violence Act. But then again, you can have a counter to it, but that obviously a few more provisions can be added to these acts, like in the Domestic Violence Act, that can accommodate such relationships as well. Then the statutory provisions of law cannot recognize a same-sex union. Such marriages make traditional roles redundant. So this is something, a very subjective thing that you have in your mind. So then we have the news in flash for today. Pakistan to turn Gilgit-Baltistan into a full-fledged province. Now this area, as we know that this entire area, orange and yellow one completely forms part of the Pak occupied Kashmir. This is Pakistan, and this area, this is the Pak occupied Kashmir. This one, this is Pakistan in the yellow one, and here this was India, but this now part is the Pak occupied Kashmir, and this boundary is known as the line of control. So in this Pak occupied Kashmir, this area, this one, the orange one, is the Gilgit-Baltistan area, and now Pakistan has said that now it would turn it into a complete full-fledged province. So the Prime Minister of Pakistan will visit the region soon to make the formal announcement to make the region a full-fledged province with all constitutional rights. So the work on the Mokpandas Special Economic Zone will also begin under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So this actually is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which starts in the Kashgar area of, this is the Xinjiang province of China, as we already have discussed. And please remember that in the Xinjiang region only, there is a community, a Muslim community known as the Uyghur Muslims, who have recently been declared as the world's, it has been declared as the as a minority community by the United Nations. So there are some ethnical conflicts again are there in the region. There, it's a separate thing to discuss. So this is the Kashgar region of China. So this moves through the Pak occupied Kashmir, which was also highly opposed by India, because still this POK area is a disputed one between India and China. And then it moves from Islamabad then to the Gwadar port of Pakistan. So this is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So this was all for today. We hope it was a good session for you. Thank you so much.